We're glad to be back, and we're going to start a new series on pilgrimage. So this morning I just want to kind of give an introduction and lay down what we're going to be talking about. So probably about 10 years ago, I had a friend whose church did a new building program. And in that building program, they put a whole wing of new offices, including his. As a senior pastor, he got a new office. And inside his office, he got every pastor's dream. They put a restroom, a bathroom inside the office. Every pastor loves that because on Sunday morning, when you're running around and all of a sudden it's getting time to go and you've got to use the restroom, everywhere you go, there's no room at the inn. There's people waiting. There's people in line. Fortunately for me, in the older section down below, there's a bathroom that nobody knows about, and that's where I sneak away to. Unfortunately for me, I just told you all about it and where it's at. So you're welcome. But that's kind of for me. So he gets this beautiful office, and somebody gives him a plant as an office warming gift. And it was a beautiful plant when he first got it. And he says, here I have this beautiful plant, and all I have to do is take 10 steps to go into my brand new restroom that has its own sink, get a glass of water, come over and feed and drink the water of the plant. He goes, but I didn't do that. I forgot completely. So what I would do is I would be sitting there working away, and then when I'm drinking my Diet Coke, I'd reach over and give the plant a sip of my Diet Coke. And this is what a plant looks like that's been given a lot of Diet Coke. And then he says this, the plant is a metaphor for my own spiritual life. God has given me this gift of salvation, but I rarely take time to prune or water it. I'm often only 10 steps away from spending time with God, taking time to be in fellowship with other believers, but too often I end up choosing sugar drinks. I like the fizz of the faith. I don't seem to thirst for the deep purity, but I chase the shallow, bright, shiny objects of the faith. And I think what's true of my friend is also true of me, and I think it's probably true of you. Here's the reality. We like the pop, the fizz, the fun of the faith, but rarely do we want to do the deep dives and thirst and hunger for the deep things that make us have to change our habits, change our rhythms, so that we can enjoy the powerful, deep things of God. We're not alone. In his famous do-do statement, Paul says this, I do not understand what I do, for I want to do, I do not do, but what I hate, I do. In other words, I don't understand what I do. I don't know why I do it. I want to go deep. I want to change the habits, change the rhythms, but I don't do it. And so then the very things I don't want to do, be superficial and just kind of know about God but not know God, I never change, and that's what ends up happening to me. So for the next 2 months, I want to talk about what's called spiritual formation. Because you're being formed right now, you have been formed, you're being formed by your culture, by your education, by your lineage, by your community, by your TV. You have been shaped by that. Here's the good news. I just got done reading an article that people that are in their 70s and 80s pretty much are who they're going to be. So if they're in their 70s and 80s and are grumpy, they're going to be grumpy because they were grumpy in their 30s, 40s, and 50s. So if you're grumpy now, good luck. But you can change it if you'll change your habits, if you'll change your rhythms in life and get in tune with God. By the way, that same article said people that are in their 70s are living their best years. In their 80s are living their second best years. And in their 60s are living the next best years. Because by now they have matured and become who they're going to be. And if they follow Christ, they're going to be something powerful if they'll allow it to happen. Here's something interesting that we were told this week from Barna Research. Just fresh, hot off the press, coming out in a new book, but by the time something comes out in a book, it's usually maybe a year or two old because the research was done early. So this is just new, fresh information. 60% of Americans call themselves Christian. But when you start to ask questions, only 4% say that they're going and trying to go deeper into a relationship with God. So I'm so happy that we had 61 men that took a Saturday and went and spent the whole time worshiping God and hearing and growing more. I'm even more impressed with the men that showed up again today on Sunday. Because a lot of men seriously would have said, I gave my time on Saturday, now I'm going to relax on Sunday. But they're here. I'm also happy for the 25 men on, there's an average of 21, but there's 25 men total that have been coming on the Wednesday nights, because what we're doing is we're talking about how do we go deeper. How do we start making those changes of our habits and our rhythm? And it requires change. It's not just to tickle your ear and give you more information. But here's one of the things we learned last Wednesday is there are barriers to going deep. We like our superficiality. It's less work. We like the pop, the fizz, the fun of church. It's easy to know about God without learning to know God. Does that make sense? Failure to prioritize. Do you know we heard this weekend that I think it was, I'm going to get this mixed up, so I'm going to be in the range. I think between 4 to 7 hours a day we are on television and social media. Am I the only one that can start swiping and an hour and a half later I'm still swiping? We focus on information about God rather than intimacy. I know a whole lot of people that know a lot about God, but they don't live it. I know some people that hardly know a lot of information about God, but love just oozes from them. Because here's the spiritual truth. Spiritual formation is not about formula, A plus B equals C. It's about relationship. It's about following the rabbi so close that the dust of the rabbi gets on your shins. And then unconfessed sin. Many of us have things that God has spoken to us about that if we don't deal with, it's not only going to hurt our relationship with God, but our relationship with our friends, our family, our spouse. But we don't want to do the deep dive that it takes to change that rhythm, to change that habit. So Pastor Dave and I, 20-some odd years ago, we went out to Saddleback to a guy named Rick Warren. Anybody ever hear of Rick Warren, the purpose-driven book, Life? Yeah. So we went out there, we went through one of their conferences, and then we were fortunate, along with 20 others, our colleagues, we sat down and had dinner with Rick Warren and his bodyguard. So he put this together, this very linear, because we are steeped in the Greek and the Latin educational system. So it's very linear. Where you committed to membership, you want to know Jesus, and then you grow in Christ to maturity, and then you commit to ministry, and then you go out and commit to missions. And then when we're with us, he said, this is very beautiful and linear, but it doesn't work, because spirituality is messy. What if you have somebody that goes on the mission trip but doesn't really know Jesus, but falls in love with the passion of what's happening? So they decide to go to third base and they want to get involved with ministry, but pretty soon they're doing ministry and they're getting exhausted because they're doing ministry on their own power, and they realize, I can't do this on my own. I think I want to try out this Jesus. So they run across the infield over to first base and they get to know Jesus. And now they know Jesus. Now they start to grow in Jesus. And it becomes a mess. He said, I think it's more like these layered concentric circles, where you're somebody in the community and somebody invites you to go maybe to Easter service, maybe to Christmas Eve service, maybe for a concert. And so you go and you become part of the crowd, just Easter and Christmas, but then you decide you want more, so you become part of the congregation. You come 2 to 3 times a week. And eventually you decide that you want to be part of the committed, so you get involved in a small group or some kind of ministry, and then you become part of the core ministry. You're now helping lead ministries. But then what happens is you have a baby, or you have a loved one who passes away, or parents that get sick, and all of a sudden you have to jump from here back to the committed or the congregation, and you get very flexible in here. You fluctuate. Or maybe we have people that have gotten hurt or angry, and they go all the way out to the community again. This spiritual formation, it's messy, it takes time, it's hard. I like to think of it of driving a clutch. Now, just about everybody in the first service had driven a clutch. So let me ask you, how many of you have driven a clutch before? Wow, a lot more than I thought. Good for you. How many of you are lying about driving a clutch? Because, all right. How many of you, and I'm not going to make fun of you, how many of you have never driven a clutch? Okay, yeah. So here's the deal. This is the clutch. And this is the brake, and this is the gas pedal. Because when you drive an automatic, you get in, you put drive, and automatically the transmission's just going first, second, third gear. You slow down back. You don't even know it's seamless. But when you drive a standard, either 4 on the floor or 3 up on the column, there's a clutch. And it's actually, once you get used to it, a beautiful dance. Because you push down on that clutch and you shift, and then you're letting up in the clutch and you're pushing the gas. So it's clutching and shifting and driving and clutching and shifting. And it's beautiful unless you're on a hill and someone's right behind you. But it's a lot of fun. The problem is when you first start to learn how to drive a clutch, you grind the gears. So you push down that clutch, and rather than a nice smooth transition, it's... And that's the way your spiritual walk is. You decide that you want to all of a sudden change those habits, change those rhythms. You want to grow in Christ. But as you're doing it, you're complaining, you're whining, you're grinding your gears because it's work. It takes intentionality. My biggest concern for all of you kids who are about to go on a retreat, my biggest concern for all of you men who just came back is that you pop your clutch. Because what happens sometimes is you push in the clutch, and then you shifted and you're getting ready to give it gas, but you just don't do it quite enough, and you pop that clutch too fast, and you lurch forward and you stall. And some of you went to this men's group, and all of a sudden you're very excited, and you decided, I'm going to make a bigger commitment to make sure I'm involved with Jesus in small groups, and I'm going to come to church, and I'm going to become a pastor and become a missionary and all these things. I don't think anybody said that, but you said the other parts. And then you pop a clutch. Work gets difficult. A friend's in town. You get distracted, squirrel, and off you go. And you just pop the clutch. And it was a moment, but you didn't develop it. So in the Bible is this thing called the Psalms. Anybody ever hear of the Psalms? There's 150 Psalms, but there's really 5 books. The word Psalms is an umbrella, and there's 5 books that make up the Psalms. And it's what the Hebrew people used for prayer, what they would use for their hymnals and their song books. A gentleman named Dwight Pryor, who passed away, but he was a theologian, Old Testament theologian, he said, if worship was at the heart of Israel, then the Psalms were the veins that transport the lifeblood, the life force to the body from the heart. They are life energy from devoted hearts to God and God's heart to responding. Now, the Psalms are written in what's called Hebrew poetry, most of them. Not all, but most of them. And we've discussed this many, many times, right? Hebrew poetry doesn't mean it's not true. It's just a style of writing, and it has more to do with rhythms than it does with rhyming. And so the first 3 verses of Genesis is known as Hebrew poetry because there's a balance to it. There's a rhythm to it. God created male, female, day, night, sun, moon, right? There's a rhythm to it. There's a balance. It's all true, but there's a rhythm and a balance to it. And he wants us to have that rhythm and balance. So even today, in many Jewish circles, the rabbis will tell you at least once a week, get very quiet and close your eyes and center yourself and breathe in and breathe out. And feel your pulse as your heart is taking blood in. And feel your pulse as your heart is pushing blood out. And make yourself aware that God himself is present with you. Because God asked Moses to go to Egypt and to set the Hebrew people free. And he said, who shall I say sent them? And he said, Yahweh. because it's Yahweh, but there were no vowels at that time. So he's just saying 4 Hebrew consonants. It sounds like you're breathing Yahweh, which means, the closest we can tell, a verb of to be. I was who I was. I am who I am. I will be who I am will be. I'm the very one that gives you breath in your lungs, the very one that makes your heart beat and blood flow. I am God. I am life. The problem is, we don't have rhythm. We just have what? We're so preoccupied with the urgent that we overlook the important. So there's a gentleman named Eugene Peterson. Anybody know that name? Yeah. He wrote the Bible, his translation, The Message. He's got about 20 books. He was a pastor, then he became a theologian and a professor, and his specialty really is spiritual formation. And he wrote a book in 1980, and then they redid it in 2000, A Long Obedience in the Same Direction, based upon the Psalms of Ascent. That's one of the 5 books. Psalm 120 to Psalm 134, the Psalms of Ascent. Because 3 times a year, you would be asked to go to Jerusalem to the temple. Once in the summer, once in the fall, and once in the spring. In the spring, it was Passover. And then in the summer, right before the summer, Pentecost, when they received the 10 Commandments. And then Sukkot, or Tabernacle in the fall, where they commemorate the fact that they wandered the wilderness for 40 days, but they always had a roof over their head, clothes on their back, food on their table. God provided. So they'll even to this day go out and live in a little tent for a couple days to remind themselves what God has done. So you're supposed to make the pilgrimage once a year. Most people didn't, but you're supposed to. But here's what would happen. Let's say hypothetically that Nazareth has 200 people in it. You can't all go because thieves and robbers will come and take everything. Someone's got to watch the livestock. So maybe 80 will go. And as they're walking down these paths, because there's no road, as they're walking down the paths or over the terrain, they connect with another 60 from another town or 50 from this town. And pretty soon, you've got thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people going up to Jerusalem. And you always go up, because Jerusalem sits 2,500 feet up. And you also go up because you're going up to God, because God is the highest point you can be. You're always going up. And you're singing these songs because you have people who are elderly, you have people who have just given birth, or maybe they lost a child, or you've got somebody who is grieving over whatever, or somebody who is celebrating, and you're going, and all of these mixed emotions, and you're encouraging one another that we're going to the temple of God. We're going to God's presence. And Peterson said there's 2 things that's expected of us as followers of Jesus. The first is we're expected to be disciples, which literally means a student of. But it's not a student like we think that sits down in a classroom and takes notes and then just regurgitates back intellectually what someone told us. It's more like an apprentice. Somebody that goes along with somebody who's an electrical person, and he's an electrician, and he says, you watch, and he does it. And then he says, now you come and help me, and we'll do it together. And now you do it, and I'll watch. Now you go multiply yourself. So the first thing that God calls us, if we're going to try to go deeper, isn't just to come to church, it's to come to church and to learn. To learn is that we can go out and multiply ourselves. Very quickly, so I was in this thing, I wasn't going to tell you this, but very quickly, I was there this weekend, and we're talking about every denomination is just dropping in attendance. So one of the guys that was there, he's one of the big shots for the Southern Baptists, and he goes, we have churches that used to run 5,000, 10,000 people who are down to 50, 100, 200 people. We're closing churches left and right. We're trying to figure out what to do. So I raised my hand and I said, so I was part of the independent charismatic movement for a while. Can I ask you a question? Why is the independent charismatic movement continuing to grow? It's the only one that's flourishing. He said, because they still tell their people, the same Spirit of God that lives in me lives in you. And God expects you to go out and do ministry. And the rest of us have just said, they have the most education, let them go out. One of the reasons we're doing the Psalms of Ascent is I want to remind you that you're called to be a disciple, which means you just don't have head knowledge. It goes into your heart and then it moves to your hand. But what if I don't know how to answer all the questions? No one does. Don't answer them. Just be you. But you who's been spending time with Jesus. And it'll happen, and it'll come out. And life change will start to happen. The second thing he says is once you're a disciple, now you start your pilgrimage. Because the scripture says Jesus Christ is, I am the what? The way, the truth, and the life. That word way is what they called the early church. The early Christians called themselves the way. But the Greek word for way is path, journey, pilgrimage. So I've now become a disciple, a follower. I'm doing all of these things, but now I continue. I haven't arrived. I'm just getting started. I'm on the path to Jerusalem. I'm on the path, metaphorically speaking. I'm on the path to the temple, to God's presence, but God's presence is inside of me. How many of you have ever watched The Voice? This is The Voice. Anybody ever watch American Idol? Or what's the other one? America's Got Talent? Have you ever noticed, have you ever watched when they have somebody get up and they sing a sacred song, a hymn, or a praise song, and everybody gets really quiet? And then you'll have a judge that'll say, it's been a long time since I felt that stirring inside of me. We think Israel is this big spiritual place. You understand, most of the people in Israel are secular. They believe that they're followers because they were born into the family. Jesus talks about that. That's a rabbit hole we're not going to chase right now. But a few years ago, there's a little girl who got up on Israel's Got Talent or Israel's Voice, and she sang one of the Psalms of Ascent. And the judges, and one in particular, said, you moved me in a way that I haven't been moved, and you're making me hunger and thirst again in a way I haven't hungered and thirst. Now, they usually sing it twice, and the second time it's louder and more powerful. We're only going to listen to one verse, but listen to the cadence. Imagine hundreds of thousands of people walking, and someone's tired, and a little girl just starts to sing this, and others join in. Check this out.
שיר למעלות, אשא עיניי אל ההרים, מאין יבוא עזרי. עזרי מעם השם, עושה שמיים וארץ, אל יתן למוט רגליך, אל ינום שומרך. הנה לא ינום ולא יישן, שומר ישראל. השם ישמורך, השם צילך, על יד ימינך. יומם השמש לא יככה, הוא ירח בלילה. השם ישמורך מכל רע, ישמור את נפשך. השם ישמור צאתך ובואך, מעתה ועד עולם. מעתה ועד עולם.
It's haunting in a good way, but this is what they would sing to remind themselves. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to do 5 minutes of Bible study and then take communion. Because Psalms 84 is not part of the book of the Psalms of Ascent. However, most scholars believe that's where it belongs because it's an introduction about it. So very quickly, let's just give me your heads for 1 minute, okay, and your hearts. How lovely is your dwelling place, O Lord Almighty. My soul yearns, even faints, for the courts of the Lord. My heart and my flesh cry out for the living God. How lovely, that word lovely is a person. How lovely is it when there's a person who hungers and thirsts to go deeper with God. They're willing to change their habits, their rhythms. They yearn and faint to be in God's presence. Have you ever seen a baby cry? I have the last couple months. Have you noticed that when a baby cries, it doesn't just cry with its mouth, the whole body? Blessed, that's what that yearning and fainting means. Blessed is somebody who's so hungry and thirsty, their intellect, their soul, their body are all aligned to grow deeper with God, and they want to go into his courts. Now, the courts they're talking about is go up into Jerusalem, but it's not just that, because this word courts also means into the home, into your courtyard. You would sleep, you would eat inside, but you would do everything else. You would do your work. You would spend time cooking outside. You'd take care of your animals outside. You were outside much more than you were inside. Blessed is the person who's so hungry and thirsty for God, their mind, their spirit, their body is aligned to go in church on Sunday morning, to be in God's presence, but they don't leave God's presence there. They take God's presence with them, and they take God's presence home with them, and then they take God's presence with them in the morning when they go to work and their drive, while they're at work, while they come home. They're doing everything within their power. They stumble sometimes, but they're trying to go deep with God and trying to keep him in their life 24/7. Deep joy are those whose strength is in you, for their hearts are set on pilgrimage. They've decided to take that journey, to constantly be growing in you. And they're going to pass through the valley of Baca, because we all do, the valley of tears. Every single person will go through struggles in life. Some go through it better than others, and usually it's because they're connected to Jesus. And they make it a place of springs, the autumn rains, the latter rains that come and soften the soil so the seeds can be planted and bear fruit. And they go from strength to strength, from light to light. So these are miners, not just in age, but also in business. And because they're small, they put them in cricks and crevices, and they'll go and they'll see if this is a new vein to follow. And people have asked them, do you get scared? And they say yes, because we don't know what's down there, bats or rats or other animals. We don't know if there's water. We don't know if it's going to collapse. When you're in the middle of a mountain and it's dark, you get scared. And they said, well, how do you handle that? And they said, we have lights that keep us about 10 feet, 20 feet ahead of us. So you learn, listen to this, you learn to walk in the light. You learn that when you take a step, the light goes deeper into the darkness, and it lights it up, and every step, just light paves the way, and you just learn to trust the light. Blessed are you. If you make a choice to come to Faithbridge every Sunday to be in the presence of God, because everybody's bringing God's presence, where two or more are gathered. But you don't just want to go through the motions, you take him home with you, and that presence is changing you. And so much so are you connected to God that when you go through the deep tears, the valley of tears, yes, you're going to have rugged times, but you don't do it by yourself. God's presence is with you, and so is your community. Because you're learning to walk in the light of the light. Because better is one day in your courts than 1,000 elsewhere. I'd rather be a doorkeeper in the house of my God than dwell in the tents of the wicked.